In this video, we will be discussing about the various floats and slacks which is happening with the network. So, and also how to remember those things very easily, some tips, and also some of the questions which is asked in the PSC examinations. Okay, so we have already seen related to how can we estimate the floats from a network, right? Now, if other than that, what are the floats? What are really the float? What is the theory behind the float? So we have seen an example like if you have a flexibility to work with. We know that the critical path is the longest path, and activities in the critical path will be having no flexibility because that is the longest path, and our project completion time will depend on the critical activity. So we cannot delay any activity in the critical activity. But take the case of non-critical events, which is the activities other than which is not coming in the critical path. Those activities, even though we delay for some time, there will not be any effect in the total project completion time. So this is the basis of float, which means that the free time available for activity. And we can see different kinds of floats which can happen in a network. So to define a float, there are many activities where the maximum time is available to finish the activities more than the time required to complete the activity. So the completion time, the duration of the activity is one thing, but if that activity is started the earliest time as possible and finishing it the latest time, so we can see that it will be much more than the total duration of the duration for which the activity has to take place, right? Now, in those cases, this difference is known as the float, right? The duration is there, but the time frame for the activity is different. For example, I have already given. Suppose if I want to complete a task on 1 o'clock and I'm starting at 9 o'clock, and the activity takes only 2 hours, then we have this 9 to 1. The total 4 hours are there, among which I have to use only 2 hours. So the 2 hours flexibility is there for me. So this is the idea of float. Okay. So in the network also there are different kind of floats are there to represent certain things. Okay. So first thing is the total float. Total float means it is the time available when all the preceding activities happening at the earliest possible time and all the succeeding activities happen at the latest possible times. So this is the maximum time we are happening. So most optimistic case is this one, because my if I take an activity in between activity, so there are succeeding activities are there are predecessing activities are there. So if my predecessing activities all happening at the earliest time, and if my succeeding activity is happening at the latest possible time, then we have the maximum float which is available for us, and that is known as the total float. So we have known the concept of the earliest time and latest time. So if we know the earliest time of the latest time of nodes, then we can calculate the total float using the equation the latest starting time minus earliest starting time, or latest finishing time minus earliest finishing time will give you the total float. And also we have an equation latest starting time, latest finishing time minus earliest starting time minus the time duration will also give you the free float, the total float. Okay. Now let's go for the second float, which is known as free float. Free float is a part of this total float only. So that part with which our succeeding activities should not be delayed. Okay, there should not be any delay in the succeeding activity, but the predecessing activity can be delayed or not, so to a maximum or not. So this is also total float is the maximum float which is available for us. In the total float, how much flexibility is there without affecting the upcoming activities? That is known as free float. We are not going to change any delay or causing any delay in the upcoming activities. But what is the time frame that we have if the predecessing activity is happening at this earliest time? Okay, so the free float can be calculated using this equation, right? The total float minus the head event slack. Head event slack means for the head event, what is the difference between the earliest time and latest time? So that will give you the head event slack. Okay, so that we have already seen. Now with the another formula with which free float could be calculated is our earliest finishing time, or EJ minus EI minus TIJ. This could also be used. I will explain what is EI and EJ, or we can simply terms in terms of earliest starting time. So earliest finishing time minus earliest starting time minus T will simply give you the free float. Okay. Now the third float is independent float. So this is all. It's a where our free float was a portion of total float only, whereas independent float is a part of free float only. Okay. So here we are not allowing any delay in the predecessing activity to happen, and also not causing any trouble for the succeeding activity. In that case, what is the float that I have? That will define the independent float. So independent float is the amount of time by which a start of an activity can be delayed without affecting the earliest time of the succeeding activity, assuming that the predecessing activity happened at the latest time. Okay, so my predecessing happening at the latest time and my succeeding activity is happening at the earliest time. Then what time is available to me without delaying any of these activities? So here also you can compute this independent float with a formula, or EJ minus LI minus TIJ, which is also our earliest finishing time minus latest start time minus T, will help you to find this independent float. Now there is another float which is known as interfering float or interference float. This is nothing but our head event slack. Head event slack means for the activity what is head event, and the difference in that the latest time and the earliest time for that activity, and the difference will give you the head event slack. Okay. Now remembering this formula, or remembering this formula or the definition might be a bit problem for you. So let's learn how to find it with a simple sketch. So just see this time frame. So this is my finishing time, LF. Latest starting time is LS. Earliest starting time is ES, and earliest finishing time is EF. So what is our head slack? Head slack is nothing but the finishing time, the difference between our finishing time. So this will give me the head slack. And what will be the tail slack? Difference between the starting times, right? So this will give you the tail slack. Okay. So these are the two slacks we have already seen. Now what will be the total float? Total float is suppose this is my duration of this activity. So this total what I have drawn now. So this completely. So this will be LF minus ES minus this duration can be subtracted. So T. So let it be T. So this will give me the total float. So my I'm starting at my earliest starting time, and I am finishing at the latest finishing time, and so this is the duration. So if I subtract the duration from that time frame, so then we will get the total float. This is the total float. Now what about free float? In the condition for free float is I cannot delay any of my succeeding activity. So succeeding activity should not have any delay which means that I have to finish at the earliest possible time. So I have to finish at the EF. So till EF, I have the time, but there is no condition for the predecessing activity. So I can have this time frame. So this from ES to EF minus this this thing will give me the tail, no, free float. Free float, which is nothing but EF minus ES minus T. So this equation you can use. Now, what is my independent float? Independent float, the condition was my succeeding activity should not be delayed, and my predecessing activity is happening at its latest time. So when it's happening at its latest time, so I can start only my latest starting time, right? So the LS, only at LS I can start. So LS I am starting, and my succeeding activity should not be delayed, so that I have to fill it the earliest possible time. So this will give you the IF. IF means independent float. So this is nothing but our EF minus LS minus T. So EF minus LF minus this duration. Now one more thing is the independent the interference float. It is nothing but our tail event slack. So this is our independent interference float. Okay. So remembering this figure will help you to identify all the floats and the definition of this floats. Okay. So if you can able to remember the definitions, that is fine. Otherwise, you can use this diagram for finding all the floats which is possible. Now let's see some of the previous PSC questions which is asked. Okay. So the first question, the extent of time by which a start of an activity may be delayed without interfering with the start of the succeeding activity is called. So which says that our start, how much my activity can be delayed without interfering with the start of the succeeding activity, right? So let's if I put those two terms, earliest start, latest start, earliest finish, and latest finish. My start of my succeeding activity is not delayed. It means I have to stop exactly at my earliest finishing time. And so what is the float that we have? Extent of time, which is nothing but the float by which start of activity may be delayed. So this it is asking. So this is what it is. So we know that the duration is there. That's okay. So what will be the answer? So it is nothing but our free float, right? We have just learned. So this is our free float. So so this is known as our free float. So the extent of time by which my start of my activity can be delayed without interfering with the start of the succeeding activity is called nothing. It's free float. Now the float, it is a similar question. The float which does not interfering with the start of the succeeding activity. So it is the same. Also, you can see that our interference float or the independent float is also independent float will give you here, right? This is our independent float. So it is also true for this one. In independent float, also the start of the subsequent activity is not going to be affected, right? But in independent float, what is there is that the finishing of the previous activity is also not going to be affected. So since that condition is not there, so this is free float. Now independent independent float is also possible answer, but the most correct answer is the free float. Okay. So in independent float also, our start of the subsequent activity is not going to be delayed. Okay. Another question, the earliest possible time for the activity to start without changing the sequence of the activities of the network, right? So the earliest possible time, right? So the how early I can start that activity for the activity without changing the sequence. So that is the definition of our earliest starting time, right? So earliest starting time. So this is nothing but earliest starting. So earliest possible time of an activity should start without changing the sequence of the activity is known as the earliest starting time. So earliest, if it is the latest possible time, then it was the latest starting time. Then if it is for the start, if it's for the finish, then it will be the latest finishing time. If it is given the earliest possible time for the activity to start, the latest possible time for activity to start, it is the latest finishing time, starting time. Okay, so that's how our earliest and latest times are defined. Now another question, the difference between the latest allowable time and the earliest expected time. So this is my ls, this is my lf, ef, ef, es. Oh, sorry, let me draw it again. L, f, ef, ls, and es. Now difference between the latest allowable time. So latest allowable time is the latest finishing time, and the earliest time. The earliest time is this one. So the difference between these two is known as our total float, right? Actually, this is the maximum float available to us, but please remember, it is asking the term which is the difference, that term is being asked. So that is known as the total float. So total float is the difference between the latest allowable time and the earliest expected time. Okay. Now, what is the characteristics of floats? So our floats, it can be positive value, or it can be a negative value, or it can be a zero value, right? So positive float means we have free time, or our resources are surplus. So what we can do for this one? So since our resources are surplus, we can use those resources for the we can allocate those resources to the activities which is very critical, right? So allocate to critical activity, or some other activities. So we don't have to use those resources. Means since we have surplus, we can use that resource. Resource could be not only the physical one, time also. So we can use the labors which is doing that activity for the other activity, so that we can improve our project completion time, and we can do, or we can smoothen the activity, distribute the load to all the things. So redistribution of activity can also be done with our surplus of this one. So when float is negative means we are running out of resource, insufficient resource. So in those cases, what we have to do is we have to find some resource, or we have to allocate, and these activities need to be addressed. Okay, so there has to be an address of this activity, and some remedies has to be taken place for the floats when it is negative. Zero means just sufficient. For a critical activity, you can see that all the floats, the total float, free float, independent float, all will be zero for critical activity, right? Now, also you can see that the total float is always greater than the free float and then the independent float. So this also you have to remember. Sometimes a question can be asked from this one. So this is all about this thing. So one more question which is asked in the the previous question paper, which is this one. Negative float can occur in case of, so the activities which is having negative float is known as the subcritical activity. No, supercritical activity, sorry. Subcritical activity is having the positive float. Okay. And the critical activity is having zero float. Now just we have seen positive, negative, and zero. So another, this is the terminology which is used to represent those things. Okay. So when I say a subcritical activity, which means that it's positive float, its float is positive. Critical activity means zero float. Supercritical activity means negative float, which means that we have the intervention has to happen in this kind of activities. Okay, so that's all with the previous year's GATE question. Previous year's questions is asking the PSC and other exams, which is related to the slacks.